Hey there, history enthusiasts. Before we dive into today's journey through one of history's most brutal periods, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We're about to explore why your modern sensibilities would absolutely crumble in the era of the Crusades, and trust me, you'll want to catch every episode where we demolish those romanticized medieval fantasies you've been holding on to. Today we're travelling back to the late 11th through 13th centuries, specifically to the tumultuous period of the Crusades. Forget everything Hollywood has taught you about noble knights, romantic quests, and honourable warfare. The Crusades were a chaotic, disease-ridden, politically twisted series of religious wars that would break you within hours. We're talking about an era where taking up the cross meant abandoning everything familiar for a journey that would probably end with you dying face down in the desert, delirious from dysentery, thousands of miles from home. Let's be clear about something right from the start. The people who lived through this period were incredibly tough. They endured conditions that would hospitalize a modern person, but that's exactly the point. You, with your climate-controlled home, antibiotics, and basic understanding of germ theory, wouldn't make it past breakfast on day one. Your body isn't conditioned for this. Your mind isn't prepared for this. And honestly, your moral compass probably couldn't process what you'd witness. So grab your metaphorical crusader's cross, not the shiny movie prop, but the actual crude wooden thing that marked you as someone about to make the worst decision of their life. And let's explore why the age of the Crusades would absolutely destroy you. Chapter 1. The Call to Arms, or How You Just Ruined Your Life. It's 1095 and you're a relatively comfortable peasant or minor landholder somewhere in France. Life isn't great. You're perpetually on the edge of starvation. You've lost half your siblings to childhood diseases, and the local lord treats you like livestock. But it's predictable. Then Pope Urban II rolls into town with the announcement that changes everything. The Pope is calling for a grand expedition to retake Jerusalem from Muslim control. He's promising spiritual rewards, complete forgiveness of all your sins, eternal salvation, and the chance to walk where Christ walked. For the nobles, there's the possibility of land, wealth, and glory. For common folks like you, there's the promise of adventure and divine favour. The crowd around you erupts in fervour. People are literally ripping up their clothing to make crosses. The energy is electric, terrifying, and completely intoxicating. Here's where you'd make your first fatal mistake. You'd get caught up in it. The preacher's words would bypass your rational brain entirely. You'd think about your miserable, mud-soaked existence and convince yourself that this is your chance for something greater. Your wife would beg you not to go. Your elderly parents would remind you that you're their only means of support in old age. But the fever has you now. You sew a cross onto your tunic with shaking hands, using cloth you can't afford to spare. Congratulations, you're now a crucisignatus, marked with the cross. You've just volunteered for a multi-year expedition across thousands of miles of hostile territory, and you have absolutely no idea what you've signed up for. The immediate consequences start hitting within days. You need to sell or trade away everything you own to finance this journey. That cow you've been carefully raising? Gone. Traded for a fraction of its value to some neighbour who knows you're desperate. Your small plot of land? Either abandoned or turned over to the local lord with promises he'll protect it until you return. Promises worth absolutely nothing. You're gathering supplies based on wild guesses and rumours. Someone tells you the journey takes 3 months. Someone else says 6. A travelling merchant who's never been further than the next province over insists you'll need certain supplies that will turn out to be completely useless. You're packing wool clothing for a journey that will take you through Mediterranean heat. You're bringing enough food for maybe 2 months of a journey that will take over a year. The families gathered for departure create scenes that would haunt you if you understood what was coming. children clutching at their father's legs, wives stone-faced with grief they can't fully express because showing doubt might curse the enterprise, elderly parents knowing they'll never see their sons again. And they're right. Most won't. The mortality rate for Crusaders was absolutely horrific, and not primarily from combat. Your travelling companions are a cross-section of medieval society, and this diversity is not the strength modern people might imagine. You've got landless younger sons, seeking fortune, genuine religious zealots who've worked themselves into a fervour, criminals who took the cross to escape punishment, adventurers seeking glory, and desperate people like yourself who saw this as the only chance for something better. These are not trained soldiers. Most have never been more than 20 miles from their birthplace. The nobles leading you are barely more prepared. The logistics of moving thousands of people across Europe are beyond anything you can imagine. There's no supply chain, no planned route with rest stops and supply depots. You're essentially a massive mob moving east, dependent on buying or taking food from every territory you pass through. The local populations quickly learn to hate Crusaders, Christian or otherwise, because you're a locust swarm consuming everything in your path. Within the first week of travel, you'd understand your mistake. Your feet are already destroyed from walking in poorly constructed shoes over rough roads. The food you brought is running low because you drastically underestimated portions. Someone in your group has already died, thrown from a horse, dysentery, a stupid argument that turned into a stabbing, and you haven't even left Christian Europe yet. The reality of constant movement starts to wear on everyone. You're waking before dawn, breaking down whatever minimal camp you'd established, and walking until exhaustion forces a halt. There's no rest days, no recovery time. The leadership pushes relentlessly because stopping means consuming more local resources and facing more hostility from populations who want you gone. Your personal hygiene deteriorates rapidly. There's no regular access to bathing facilities. Water is too precious to waste on washing when you need it for drinking. Your clothes become stiff with sweat, dirt, and oils from your skin. The smell is overwhelming, but everyone around you smells equally terrible, so you almost stop noticing. Almost. The social dynamics of your travelling group become strained almost immediately. People who started as friends become irritable and short-tempered from hunger, exhaustion, and stress. Arguments erupt over trivial matters. Who's carrying more weight? Who got a larger portion of food? Who's walking too slowly? Violence becomes a regular occurrence as people's worst impulses surface under pressure. Chapter 2. The March East, or Europe's longest death march. The journey from Western Europe to the Holy Land is roughly 2,500 miles, depending on your route. You'll be walking most of it. Let that sink in for a moment. Modern people get winded walking from their car to the grocery store entrance. You're about to walk the distance from New York to Los Angeles, through territories ranging from friendly to actively hostile, with medieval logistics and no real maps. Your body starts breaking down almost immediately. Those shoes you were so proud of, the leather is cheap and poorly treated. Within weeks, the stitching is coming apart. You've tried to repair them, but you don't really know how to work leather properly. Your feet are a disaster of blisters, calluses, and open wounds that never fully heal because you're walking on them every single day. Infection is a constant threat, and you don't even have the concept of antiseptic. The blisters on your feet are beyond anything you've experienced. They form, burst, form again in layers. The raw flesh underneath is exposed to dirt, sweat, and the leather of your shoes. Each step is agony, but you can't stop walking. You can't even slow down without falling behind and getting separated from your group, which would likely mean death from bandits or starvation. The smell of your travelling group is beyond modern comprehension. Thousands of people who bathe maybe once a month if there's accessible water, wearing wool and leather that's absorbing sweat, urine, and all manner of bodily fluids. In summer heat, travelling through the Balkans and Anatolia, the stench becomes a physical presence, You can taste it. Modern people who've never experienced true medieval filth simply cannot imagine what this does to your psyche. Being constantly surrounded by overwhelming odours of unwashed humanity, spoiled food, human waste, and death. Speaking of waste, there's no sanitation infrastructure for a massive travelling army. You're stopping each night in temporary camps and thousands of people need to relieve themselves. Latrines, when anyone bothers to dig them, are shallow pits that quickly overflow. Most people just walk a short distance from camp. The result is that you're constantly camping in or near areas contaminated with human waste. Water sources become polluted within days of an army passing through. Dysentery becomes your constant companion. You're drinking from streams and rivers that other groups upstream have been using as toilets. The cramping, the fever, the endless trips to squat in the bushes while praying you don't soil yourself before you get there, it's relentless. You're losing weight rapidly, becoming dehydrated, and there's no cure. Medieval people just had to endure it. Many didn't survive. You'd be among the ones who didn't make it. The physical sensation of dysentery is indescribable to someone who's never experienced it. Your intestines feel like they're being twisted and wrung out. The cramping comes in waves so intense you can't stand upright. You're running a fever that makes everything seem dreamlike and distant, and you're still expected to walk 20 miles the next day, carrying your pack, keeping up with the army. Food is a perpetual crisis. The initial supplies you brought are long gone. Now you're dependent on what you can buy, beg, steal, or forage from the lands you're passing through. When the army approaches a town, the local population either flees with their food stores or jacks up prices to extortionate levels. You're paying a week's worth of the money you have left for a loaf of bread that's more sawdust than wheat. Foraging sounds romantic until you're actually doing it. You don't know which plants are edible in these foreign lands. The berries that look safe might cause violent illness. The mushrooms could end you. You watch others try foods first, learning from their suffering what to avoid. Some die from eating the wrong things. Others get desperately ill. You're making dietary choices based on watching other people's intestinal distress. When the army does acquire food, usually by requisitioning it from local populations, let's call it what it is, stealing, the distribution is completely inequitable. The nobles and knights eat first and best, then their retainers and soldiers. Common crusaders like yourself get whatever scraps remain. You're fighting with other desperate people over mouldy bread and questionable meat. Medieval concepts of sharing and brotherhood evaporate quickly when people are starving. The violence that accompanies food acquisition is something you'd struggle to participate in. You're part of an armed mob descending on villages, taking what you need by force. The villagers might resist. People die. Sometimes your fellow crusaders, sometimes the villagers, often both. You're witnessing or participating in actions that would be considered war crimes in modern context. But here, it's just Tuesday. The weather is your enemy in ways modern climate control has made you forget. Summer heat is unbearable in your wool clothing and whatever armour or protective gear you've scrounged. There's no shade on many stretches of road. Water is scarce and often unsafe. You're sweating constantly, losing salts and fluids you can't replace. Heat exhaustion and heat stroke claim lives regularly, and you wouldn't recognise the symptoms until you're collapsing. When someone collapses from heat stroke, there's no emergency medical response. They're left by the roadside if they can't continue. Maybe a companion stays with them if they're especially close friends or family. But the army keeps moving. You can't afford sentimentality. That person you've been travelling with for weeks, if they fall, they're gone. You might never know if they recovered or died alone on that dusty road. Winter is equally brutal. Your clothing isn't designed for extreme cold, and you can't carry enough layers for both seasons. Night temperatures plummet, and you're sleeping on the ground with maybe a thin blanket. Hypothermia is a real threat. Frostbite damages fingers and toes. Pneumonia sweeps through camps, killing the already weakened. You'd cycle between freezing at night and sweating during daytime marches, never truly comfortable, never truly dry. The wet cold is worse than the dry cold. When it rains, your wool clothing absorbs water and becomes impossibly heavy. It doesn't dry because you're sleeping in it and wearing it the next day when it rains again. The dampness seeps into your bones. Your fingers and toes go numb. The shivering is uncontrollable and exhausting. Your body burning calories, you don't have to try to stay warm. The Balkans present special challenges. The terrain is mountainous and rugged. The local populations view you with suspicion or outright hostility. You're a foreign army marching through their lands after all. The Byzantine Empire, which controls much of this territory, has a complicated relationship with the Crusades. Sometimes they help, sometimes they hinder. Often they just want you to pass through as quickly as possible and stop causing problems. You'd encounter your first significant culture shock in Byzantine territories. These are fellow Christians, but their Orthodox faith and Greek language make them seem alien to you. Their cities are more sophisticated than anything you've seen in Western Europe, which would be simultaneously amazing and intimidating. Constantinople, if you pass through it, would blow your medieval mind. A city of hundreds of thousands, with architecture and wealth beyond your comprehension. The walls of Constantinople would seem impossibly massive to someone from a Western European village. The churches are decorated with gold and mosaics that gleam in ways you've never seen. The markets sell goods from all over the known world: spices, silks, exotic foods. The contrast with your own poverty and filth would be stark and demoralizing. You're supposedly on a holy mission, but you look and smell like a barbarian. But the Byzantines don't trust you, and with good reason. Crusader armies have a terrible reputation for looting, violence, and general mayhem. You'd be denied entry to cities, forced to camp outside walls, sold supplies at inflated prices, and generally treated like the barbarian horde you essentially are. The resentment goes both ways. Western Crusaders consider the Byzantines as soft, decadent, and questionable Christians. The Byzantine soldiers you encounter are professional military men with training, equipment, and tactics that make your ragtag Crusader army look even worse by comparison. They regard you with barely concealed contempt. You're useful idiots doing the dirty work of fighting Muslims while they maintain their sophisticated civilization. The power dynamics are humiliating. Disease is constantly decimating your numbers. In addition to dysentery, you've got typhoid fever spreading through contaminated water and food. Typhus lives in the lice that infest everyone's clothing and hair. There's no escaping them. Malaria becomes a threat as you move into warmer climates with standing water. Medieval people called these illnesses fevers and had no understanding of their causes, treating them with prayers, bloodletting, and herbal remedies that ranged from useless to actively harmful. The lice are a special torment. They're everywhere, in your hair, your clothing, your bedding such as it is. They bite constantly, causing itching that drives you to distraction. You can pick them out of your clothes and crush them between your thumbnails, but there are always more. The lice carry typhus, but you don't know that. You just know that people keep developing these terrible fevers and many of them die. The psychological toll is mounting every day. You're exhausted beyond anything you've experienced. You're malnourished, diseased, and in constant pain. You're watching people die regularly, sometimes violently, sometimes quietly in the night from fever or dysentery. There's no therapy, no counselling, no mental health support. You're just expected to endure and have faith that God has a plan. The deaths are what wear you down mentally. At first, each death is a tragedy. You knew these people. You travelled with them. But after the 10th, the 20th, the 50th death, you start to become numb. You have to, or you'd go insane. You develop dark humor about death. You make bets about who'll die next. It's a coping mechanism, but it also represents the death of part of your own humanity. Arguments and violence within the Crusader ranks are constant. Stress, hunger, sickness, and proximity breed conflict. Different language groups distrust each other. Nobles jockey for position and authority. Common soldiers fight over resources. You've witnessed multiple murders among your own forces, not enemies, but fellow Christians supposedly on the same divine mission. The dream of brotherhood in Christ's service is revealed as naive fantasy. One night, you watch two men from your own group fight with knives over a piece of cheese. Actually fight to the death over cheese. One of them dies bleeding in the dirt, and everyone just steps over the body the next morning. Nobody investigates. Nobody punishes the survivor. This is normal now. This is what you've become. Chapter 3. Entering Muslim lands, or Everything Gets Worse. Crossing from Byzantine territory into lands controlled by Muslim powers marks a fundamental shift in your circumstances. You're now in genuinely hostile territory, where the population views you as an invading force, because that's exactly what you are. The ambient danger level increases exponentially. The Seljuk Turks and other Muslim powers have home field advantage in every sense. They know the terrain intimately. They know where the water sources are and can deny them to you. They can deploy light cavalry that harasses your slow-moving column of exhausted infantry. They can attack supply lines, cutting you off from resources. And they have every motivation to stop you from reaching Jerusalem. Your first encounter with Turkish cavalry tactics would be terrifying and disorienting. These aren't the heavy cavalry charges you've heard about in songs about European knights. Turkish horsemen are light, fast, and employ hit-and-run tactics. They ride up, unleash volleys of arrows, and retreat before you can effectively respond. They're not interested in glorious charges. They want to bleed you slowly, exhaust you, and destroy your cohesion. The composite bows used by Turkish horse archers have longer range than the weapons your army possesses. They can hit you from distances where you can't effectively fight back. They ride in, shoot, and vanish before your plodding infantry can close the distance. It's frustrating, terrifying, and demoralizing. You're taking casualties constantly, but rarely getting chances to inflict them in return. The arrows are a constant threat. They come from distances your own archers can't match. They target horses, pack animals, and anyone who looks important. Even a non-lethal arrow wound can be fatal if it gets infected. And in your filthy medieval circumstances, infection is almost guaranteed. You'd watch men die slowly from seemingly minor wounds, their flesh turning black and putrid, fever consuming them over days of agony. You see a companion take an arrow through the calf. It doesn't seem that serious at first. The arrow is removed, the wound is bound with a dirty cloth, and he keeps walking. But over the next week, you watch the wound fester. The flesh around it becomes inflamed and hot to the touch. Red streaks run up his leg. The fever sets in. He becomes delirious, calling for his mother. Then he dies, and you help bury him in a shallow grave that will probably be dug up by animals before you're even over the next hill. Water becomes a weapon used against you. Muslim forces know where the wells and springs are. They poison water sources ahead of your advance, sometimes throwing dead animals into wells. They deny you access to rivers and oases through tactical positioning. You're marching through increasingly arid territory, and dehydration becomes as deadly as any sword. People are drinking from increasingly questionable sources, accelerating disease spread. The desperation for water reaches levels that would horrify modern people. You've seen men fighting each other for access to muddy puddles that livestock have been standing in. You've watched people drink their own urine when no other water was available. You've seen the madness that dehydration causes. People wandering away from the column, convinced they see water in the distance, dying alone in the desert chasing mirages. The heat of Anatolia and Syria is unlike anything most Western Europeans have experienced. We're talking about summer temperatures regularly exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and you're wearing layers of clothing designed for European climates. Knights in armour are literally cooking inside their metal shells. You've heard stories of men so desperate for water they drink their own urine or their horse's blood. These aren't exaggerations. They're survival attempts. The sun beats down relentlessly. There's no shade on these open plains and deserts. The metal of weapons and armour becomes too hot to touch with bare skin. The ground radiates heat. Your feet are cooking in your leather shoes. Your head pounds from dehydration and heat exposure. Your tongue swells in your mouth. Your lips crack and bleed. This is what hell must be like, you think, and you're only halfway to Jerusalem. Foraging becomes nearly impossible. You're in unfamiliar terrain with different plants and animals. Local populations have fled or hidden their food stores. The landscape itself is often sparse. You're not in fertile European countryside anymore. Starvation becomes a serious threat. The army is forced to kill pack animals and horses for food, which creates a vicious cycle because now you've lost transport capacity. When a horse is finally slaughtered for food, the scene is desperate and chaotic. People rush in with knives and containers, fighting over pieces of meat. Nothing is wasted. The organs, the blood, even the intestines are consumed. The meat is distributed unfairly, with the powerful taking the best cuts and the weak getting scraps or nothing. You manage to get a chunk of tough, stringy muscle that you chew raw because there's no time or fuel for cooking. At night, the psychological warfare intensifies. You're camped in hostile territory, and Muslim forces use the darkness effectively. They attack sentries, steal supplies, create noise and confusion to prevent sleep. You're already exhausted, and now you can't rest properly because you might wake up with a knife at your throat. Sleep deprivation compounds all your other problems, making you slower, less alert, and more prone to mistakes. The night raids are terrifying in their unpredictability. Sometimes nothing happens. Sometimes you're jolted awake by screaming and the clash of weapons. You stumble out of your bedroll, trying to figure out which direction the attack is coming from, whether you should grab your weapon or run. By the time you're oriented, the attackers have usually melted back into the darkness, leaving casualties and chaos behind. The cultural differences would be profoundly disorienting for a medieval European mind. Cities in the region are architecturally sophisticated, with engineering that surpasses most of what you've seen back home. The Muslim world at this time is actually more scientifically and culturally advanced than Western Europe in many ways, which would challenge your assumption of Christian superiority. Not that you'd admit this or even fully process it through your religious worldview. When you finally see a Muslim city before the army attacks it, you're struck by the architecture. The buildings are more elegant than anything back home. The mosques have these impossibly tall minarets. The irrigation systems are more sophisticated than European technology. There are libraries, hospitals, and centres of learning. This contradicts everything you've been told about these people being barbarians. But you push that thought down because it's too uncomfortable. When Crusader forces do capture cities, what follows would shatter any romantic notions about crusading. The sack of a city is not a glorious victory. It's organised chaos and violence. Soldiers, including your companions and possibly yourself, engage in behaviour that contradicts everything the religious mission supposedly represents. The aftermath of urban conquest in this era was brutal, and crusaders had a particularly terrible reputation. You'd be forced to participate in or witness acts that would haunt you. Medieval warfare didn't have Geneva Conventions. Civilians weren't protected categories. Cities that resisted were treated as examples. The violence wasn't just strategic, it was often driven by months of pent-up frustration, fear, hunger, and rage from the march. Your modern moral framework would shatter confronting what humans are capable of when constraints are removed. The sounds and sights of a city being sacked are nightmare fuel. Buildings burning, people screaming, the clash of weapons and the breaking of doors as soldiers search for anything valuable. You see things being done to civilians that you can't unsee. You might participate because everyone around you is doing it, because you've been dehumanized by months of suffering, because you're caught up in mob mentality. Afterward, you won't be able to explain or justify it, even to yourself. The moral dissonance between the religious mission and the reality would be crushing if you allowed yourself to think about it. You took up the cross to serve God and save your soul, but what you're actually doing bears little resemblance to Christ's teachings. Medieval people compartmentalized this through concepts of holy warfare and divine mandate that justified actions otherwise considered sinful. You'd need to adopt this thinking or face psychological breakdown. The priests and religious leaders with the army provide the necessary justifications. They tell you that these people are enemies of God, that violence against them is righteous, that you're instruments of divine will. You want to believe this because the alternative, that you're just engaging in barbarism for no good reason, is unbearable. So you accept the justifications and try not to think too deeply about the contradictions. Disease reaches catastrophic levels once the army is in the Levant. In addition to everything you've already dealt with, you're now exposed to regional diseases your body has no immunity to. Malaria is endemic in many areas. Typhoid sweeps through Crusader camps with devastating efficiency. Scurvy begins affecting those who've been on campaign for many months without fresh fruits or vegetables. Your gums bleed, your teeth loosen, old wounds reopen, and you feel like you're falling apart from the inside. The medical care available is worse than nothing. Battlefield medicine consists of crude surgery without anesthesia, cauterization of wounds with hot irons, bloodletting for almost every ailment, and prayers. The doctors don't wash their hands or instruments. They don't understand infection. They reuse bandages. A minor wound treated by a medieval physician might turn into a death sentence from sepsis. You'd witness amputations performed with saws and axes. The patient held down by several strong men while they scream. The limb is removed, the stump is cauterized or tarred to stop bleeding, and then everyone hopes infection doesn't set in, which it usually does. The survival rate for major surgery is abysmal. Many choose to die of their original wound rather than submit to treatment that's almost certain to finish them off. You watch a man get his arm amputated after it's crushed by a falling stone during a siege. They tie him down and give him a stick to bite on. The surgeon starts sawing through flesh and bone while the man's screams rise above everything else. The bone is harder to cut than the surgeon expected, so it takes longer. The patient passes out from pain, which is a mercy. When they finally get the arm off and cauterize the stump with a red-hot iron, the smell of burning flesh makes you vomit. The man dies 2 days later from infection anyway. Chapter 4. Siege Warfare, or Months of Organized Misery. Eventually, your Crusader army reaches a fortified city that needs to be taken. Siege warfare in the crusading era is a special kind of hell that combines all the worst aspects of medieval military life and concentrates them into months-long ordeals that destroy armies from within. A siege means you're camping outside city walls for weeks or months, trying to starve out the defenders while they rain projectiles down on you, and you slowly starve as well. It's a waiting game played with human lives as currency, and common soldiers like yourself are the ones paying the price. Your camp outside the besieged city is a nightmare of overcrowding and filth. thousands of men packed into a relatively small area with no proper sanitation, limited water, and decreasing food supplies. The smell alone would overwhelm a modern person. Imagine a music festival's bathroom situation, but for months and without any actual facilities. Just thousands of men relieving themselves in increasingly contaminated areas. The latrines, such as they are just trenches dug on the camp's periphery. They fill quickly and overflow. Waste seeps into the ground, contaminating everything. Flies swarm in biblical proportions, landing on food, faces, open wounds, spreading disease with every touch. The fly population gets so dense that eating a meal without consuming several of them is basically impossible. You develop techniques for dealing with the flies. You eat quickly, shoveling food into your mouth before too many flies can land on it. You learn to ignore the sensation of flies walking across your face while you sleep. You stop being disgusted when you accidentally swallow one. This is normal now. This is just how life is during a siege. Water sources quickly become compromised. The wells near camp are overused and often contaminated with seepage from the latrine areas. Rivers and streams are being used simultaneously for drinking, washing, and waste disposal. You're watching people develop dysentery, cholera, and typhoid in waves that sweep through the camp. On many crusades, disease killed far more than combat ever did. The water tastes wrong. You can tell it's contaminated even if you don't understand the mechanism. It has a slight smell, a different texture in your mouth. But you have to drink something, so you drink it anyway and hope you're one of the lucky ones who doesn't get sick. You're not lucky. Nobody is. It's just a question of how sick you get and whether you survive it. Food supplies dwindle as the siege drags on. The surrounding countryside has been stripped of anything edible. Supply lines from friendly territory are tenuous and frequently attacked. You're on progressively, shorter rations, and the quality of what you're eating is declining. That salted meat has been sitting in barrels for months and is probably starting to turn. The hardtack is infested with weevils. You eat it anyway because protein is protein, and you're starving. The hardtack is so hard it can break your teeth if you bite it wrong. You learn to soak it in water or whatever liquid is available to soften it before eating. The weevils add a bitter taste and a disturbing texture. You try not to look at what you're eating, just get it down and hope it stays down. Your body is consuming itself from lack of proper nutrition. You can see your ribs. Your face is gaunt. Everyone looks like walking corpses. Foraging parties have to range farther and farther from camp to find anything, which makes them vulnerable to ambush. You might be assigned to one of these parties, forced to walk for miles in full gear, desperately seeking food in already picked over territory, knowing that enemy forces are watching for exactly this kind of opportunity. Many foraging parties don't return. You're part of a foraging party that gets caught in an ambush. One moment you're walking through scrubland, searching for anything edible. The next, arrows are flying and men are screaming. You don't even see where the attackers are. Someone next to you takes an arrow through the throat and goes down gurgling. You run, abandoning your spear, abandoning your companions, just running back toward camp. You make it. Many don't. Nobody talks about it afterward. The actual siege work is brutal, dangerous labor. You're digging trenches and tunnels, building siege towers and battering rams, filling in defensive ditches, all while under fire from the city walls. Defenders pour boiling water, hot sand, burning oil, and various projectiles down on anyone who gets close. Arrows and crossbow bolts rain constantly. Rocks from catapults crush people into paste. The siege tower construction is assigned to you and your group. You're hauling timber, hammering nails, all while wearing whatever armor you have because the defenders are shooting at you constantly. A man working 20 feet from you takes a crossbow bolt through the eye. He drops without a sound. You keep hammering because stopping means you might be next. And at least working gives you something to focus on besides the terror. Building a siege tower is incredibly dangerous work. You're constructing a massive wooden structure that needs to be tall enough to reach or exceed the city walls, mobile enough to be pushed into position, and sturdy enough not to collapse under its own weight. All of this is happening while people on those walls are trying to kill you with every tool at their disposal. The defenders will use fire arrows to try to burn your siege equipment before you can deploy it. When the tower is finally ready and being pushed toward the walls, you're assigned to the pushing crew, the most dangerous job in the army. You're on the ground floor, shoving this massive structure across uneven terrain, while rocks, arrows, and burning materials rain down from above. The tower's hide covering provides some protection, but not enough. Men are constantly being crushed by falling debris, struck by projectiles that penetrate the tower's defences or simply collapsing from exhaustion and heat. The heat inside the siege tower is unbearable. You're enclosed in wood and hide, pushing with all your strength, and the sun is beating down on the structure. It's like being inside an oven. Sweat pours off you. Your muscles scream. Your lungs burn. Men are collapsing from heat stroke, but you can't stop pushing because if the tower stops moving, you're all dead. The defenders will concentrate their fire and destroy it. If you're inside the tower when it reaches the walls, you're part of the assault team. The bridge drops, and you're expected to charge across into a wall of defenders who've been preparing for exactly this moment. The casualties in these initial assaults are catastrophic. The first waves are essentially sacrificial. Their job is to die, while hopefully creating enough chaos for subsequent waves to gain a foothold. The moment the bridge drops, you're hit with a wall of sound and sensation. Defenders are right there, weapons ready. You charge because the men behind you are pushing you forward and there's nowhere else to go. You step over bodies. Are they alive? Dead? Dying? You don't know and can't stop to check. Someone swings an axe at your head. You block with your shield and feel the impact shudder through your arm. Everything is chaos and noise and terror. Mining operations, digging tunnels under the walls to collapse them, are equally deadly. You're underground in cramped, poorly ventilated tunnels, shored up with timber that might collapse at any moment. Defenders sometimes countermine, digging their own tunnels to intercept yours. When two mining operations meet underground, the resulting fight is claustrophobic. Nightmare combat in near-total darkness, with no room to maneuver and nowhere to retreat. You've been assigned to mining duty, which means spending hours underground in passages barely wide enough to crawl through. The air is stale and dusty. The darkness is absolute when the torches go out. The weight of the earth above you is psychologically crushing. You're constantly aware that collapse could come at any moment, burying you alive. The sounds of digging sometimes echo strangely, and you can't tell if it's your own crew or enemy counterminers getting closer. The psychological pressure of siege warfare is relentless. Every day is the same. Hard labor under fire, diminishing rations, disease spreading through camp, casualty lists growing. You watch men who've survived the entire march east die from a random arrow while digging a trench. You see your friends waste away from dysentery. You feel your own body weakening from malnutrition and constant stress. You stop thinking about the future because there doesn't seem to be one. You exist in an eternal present of suffering. You can't remember what it felt like to be comfortable, well-fed, or safe. Those memories seem like they belong to a different person. You're just trying to survive one more day, then one more, then one more, with no end in sight. Morale disintegrates over long sieges. Desertion becomes common, despite the severe penalties. Men simply walk away in the night, willing to risk execution if caught, because staying seems like guaranteed death anyway. Arguments escalate into violence over shrinking resources. Different contingents of the Crusader army blame each other for failures and setbacks. If the siege drags on long enough, the besiegers might start dying faster than the besieged. Cities generally have stored supplies for exactly this scenario. Your army doesn't. There are documented cases of Crusader armies outside city walls, reduced to eating their horses, then leather goods, then basically anything organic. Starvation makes men desperate and drives them to unthinkable choices. You hear rumours, you hope they're just rumours, about what some groups are doing to survive, about bodies disappearing from where they were buried, about meat being distributed that doesn't come from any animal anyone can identify. You don't investigate these rumours. You don't want to know. You eat what you're given and try not to think about where it came from. The defenders aren't passive. They make sorties, sudden armed rushes out of the city gates to attack siege works, burn equipment or kill besiegers. These can happen at any time, and if you're on guard duty or working near the walls when a sortie hits, you're fighting for your life against fresh, well-fed defenders while you're exhausted and malnourished. The surprise and ferocity of these attacks can be devastating. When a city finally falls, either through successful assault, starvation, or negotiation, what follows depends on circumstances, but is horrific. Horrific. Cities taken by storm, meaning the walls were breached by force, were traditionally subject to sacking. Everything we discussed about urban conquest applies here, amplified by months of built-up frustration, anger, and desire for payback from the besiegers. If you survive the siege, either the assault itself or the months of slow attrition, you're fundamentally changed. You've watched hundreds or thousands die. You've been complicit in or witnessed actions that violate every moral teaching you grew up with. You're physically wrecked from months of poor food, hard labour and constant stress. And the campaign isn't over. There are more cities, more sieges, more marches through hostile territory ahead. Chapter 5. The Holy City, or the Destination That Breaks You. You've somehow survived the march, the battles, the sieges, and the diseases that kill the majority of those who started this journey with you. You're finally approaching Jerusalem, the objective of this entire nightmare. This should be the moment of triumph, the spiritual culmination of all your suffering. Instead, it's where everything you've been through crystallizes into a reality that would destroy your modern sensibilities. The final approach to Jerusalem is through the Judean desert, one of the most unforgiving environments you've encountered yet. It's waterless, shadeless, and scorching. Your already depleted army is pushed to the absolute limit. Men are collapsing from heat stroke and dehydration. Some are hallucinating from thirst. The Promised Land is trying to kill you before you even reach its holiest city. The desert crossing is a fever dream of suffering. The sun reflects off pale rocks with blinding intensity. Heat shimmers make the horizon waver and dance. You see water that isn't there. You see cities in the distance that disappear when you get closer. Your mind is playing tricks, but you can't trust your own perceptions anymore. All you can do is follow the person in front of you and hope they know where they're going. When Jerusalem finally comes into view, the religious fervour that overtakes the army is intense and disturbing. Men who can barely stand are weeping and praying. Some are so overwhelmed they collapse. Medieval chronicles describe crusaders who died at that moment, supposedly from the sheer joy of seeing the city, though realistically, they probably just succumbed to all the physical stresses they'd been enduring. You see grown men sobbing, prostrating themselves on the ground, crying out to God. The emotional release after months of hell is overwhelming. You feel it too, this surge of something. Relief, triumph, religious ecstasy, or just the desperate hope that the suffering might finally end. You don't even know anymore. Your emotional responses have been so battered by the journey that you can barely identify what you're feeling. But Jerusalem in 1099, or during any of the subsequent Crusades, is not the peaceful holy city of your imagination. It's a fortified military target that needs to be taken by force. The city's defences are formidable: thick walls, well-supplied defenders, and a population that knows exactly what's coming if the city falls to Crusaders. The siege of Jerusalem follows the same patterns we've discussed, but amplified by the religious significance and the desperate state of the Crusader army. You have almost no supplies. The surrounding area has been stripped bare. Water is critically scarce. The defenders have poisoned or blocked many of the wells and springs outside the city. You're expected to conduct siege operations while literally dying of thirst. The thirst is maddening in a way that's hard to describe. Your mouth is so dry your tongue sticks to the roof of your mouth. Your throat feels like it's closing up. Your skin is tight and burning. Your urine is dark and scanty. Your thoughts become confused and scattered. And you're supposed to do hard physical labour in this condition, building siege equipment and preparing for assault. The heat during a summer siege of Jerusalem is indescribable for someone from medieval Europe. You're working in temperatures that regularly exceed 100 degrees Fahrenheit, wearing wool and whatever armour you've managed to keep, doing heavy labour with insufficient water and food. Modern people would require hospitalisation within hours under these conditions. You're expected to maintain this for weeks. The siege work is made harder by the lack of materials. There aren't forests nearby to harvest timber for siege engines. Wood has to be found miles away and hauled back to camp. Building the siege towers and other equipment required for assault takes longer and costs more lives than usual because every resource is scarce and contested. You're part of a work crew that has to travel to a distant forest to cut timber. The round trip takes days. You're carrying axes and saws, walking through hostile territory, knowing you're vulnerable to attack the entire time. When you finally reach trees suitable for siege equipment, the work of cutting them down and preparing them for transport is exhausting. Then you have to drag these massive timbers back to Jerusalem. Men died during this operation, from ambush, from heat stroke, from simple exhaustion. When the assault finally comes, you're part of a desperate, half-starved army throwing itself at strong defences. The fighting is savage beyond description. Defenders are fighting for their lives, their families, and their city. Attackers are driven by months of suffering, religious fervour, and the promise that taking the city will end this nightmare. The violence is intense and sustained. If you survive the assault and the city falls, what happens next is where your modern moral framework would completely shatter. The historical records of what happened when Crusaders took Jerusalem and other cities during the Crusades describe events that are difficult to discuss in detail without being graphic. Let's just say that the behaviour of the conquering Crusaders contradicted every principle of mercy, compassion, and Christian charity that supposedly motivated the entire enterprise. You'd be witnessing or participating in mass violence against civilians. The justifications would be offered: religious warfare, divine mandate, punishment for resisting. But none of that would make the reality any less horrific. Medieval chroniclers, even those sympathetic to the Crusaders, described wading through streets running with significant amounts of bodily fluids. This is not heroic conquest. This is organised barbarism. The sounds are the worst part. Not just the screaming, but the breaking, the sounds of doors being smashed in, of people begging in languages you don't understand, of children crying, of buildings burning. It goes on for hours, and you're part of it, or you're watching it, and either way, it's marking your soul in ways that won't heal. The religious significance of Jerusalem makes the cognitive dissonance even worse. You're standing in the places where Christ preached peace and love, and around you is the aftermath of conquest. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, built on the site where Jesus was supposedly crucified and buried, becomes a destination for crusaders to pray for forgiveness, for what they've just done. The hypocrisy would be staggering if anyone allowed themselves to think about it clearly. You go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, still covered in the filth and evidence of recent violence, and you pray. You beg God for forgiveness. You cry tears that you haven't cried since this whole thing started. You want to believe that it was all worth it, that God will understand, that this was necessary. But deep down, in a place you can't acknowledge even to yourself, you know something fundamental has broken. But most don't think about it clearly, because medieval religious frameworks provided justifications and mental compartments for this behaviour. Muslims and Jews were seen as enemies of Christ, whose defeat was divinely ordained. Violence in service of retaking holy sites was sanctified. You'd need to adopt this thinking to maintain sanity, pushing down any doubts or moral qualms. Even in victory, life in Crusader-held Jerusalem is difficult and dangerous. The city is damaged from the siege. Infrastructure needs rebuilding. The Christian population is small compared to the Muslim and Jewish populations that were there before the conquest. Supplies are still scarce. The surrounding territory is hostile. Muslim forces are already planning to retake the city. If you're a common soldier, you're probably not getting the rewards you imagined. The best spoils go to the nobles and knights. You might get some loot if you were quick during the sacking, but sustained wealth? Unlikely. Land. Grants go to important people, not random foot soldiers. You're still poor, just in a different location. The division of spoils is brutal and unfair. You watch nobles stuff sacks with gold and jewels while you got to keep a few coins and maybe a decent knife you found. The land grants being discussed don't include you. The positions of power in the new Crusader kingdom aren't for people like you. You risked everything, endured hell, compromised your morality, and you're ending up with basically nothing to show for it. The Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem and other Crusader states that were established are perpetually under threat. Muslim powers want their territory back. Byzantine Christians have complicated relationships with the Latin Crusaders. The local Christian populations don't always welcome Western Crusaders, who they see as crude, violent foreigners. You're in a military occupation situation that requires constant vigilance. Daily life in the Crusader states means living in a fortress mentality. Cities are heavily fortified. Travel between settlements is dangerous. Raids and skirmishes are constant. You're part of a military society where everyone is expected to bear arms and fight when needed. The promised land of peace and pilgrimage is actually a war zone that never really achieves stability. The climate continues to be a challenge. You're from Northern Europe, and you're now living in Mediterranean and desert climates. The heat is constant. Water is always a concern. Diseases you've never encountered back home are endemic. Many Crusaders who survive the journey and the conquest still die within a few years, from ailments their bodies aren't equipped to handle. You keep getting sick with fevers and stomach ailments that the local populations seem more resistant to. Your body never fully adapts to the climate. You dream about cool rain and green forests. You'd give anything for a proper winter, for cold, clean water, for the familiar foods of home. But home is impossibly far away, and getting back there seems almost as difficult as getting here was. If you try to return home, and many do, having fulfilled their vow to reach Jerusalem, you face that entire journey in reverse. Thousands of miles of hostile or indifferent territory, with even fewer resources than you had on the way there. Your body is wrecked from everything you've been through. You're traumatized in ways medieval medicine doesn't recognize or treat. The return journey kills nearly as many as the initial crusade. For those who make it back to Europe, reintegration is difficult. You've been gone for years. Your family might have presumed you dead and moved on. The land you abandoned is gone, claimed by others. You're physically broken, mentally scarred and displaced in your own homeland. The promises of wealth and glory ring hollow when you're a beggar on streets that used to be your home. The spiritual rewards? Those remain uncertain until death you've secured. Forgiveness for your sins, supposedly. But at what cost to your conscience? You carry memories of things you've done and witnessed that contradict everything you believe about Christian behaviour. Medieval religion offered confession and penance, but it didn't offer therapy for what we'd now recognise as severe trauma. Chapter 6. The brutal reality of Crusader combat. Let's talk specifically about combat in the crusading era, because Hollywood has given you completely wrong ideas about what fighting actually looked like. Forget the clean, choreographed sword duels. Medieval combat, especially the desperate battles of the Crusades, was chaotic, exhausting, and absolutely brutal. First, understand that you're not a trained warrior. You're a common soldier, maybe with basic training in using a spear or sword, but nothing like the years of practice knights receive. Your equipment is whatever you could afford or scavenge. You've got a simple sword or spear, maybe a shield, some kind of padded armour if you're lucky, and a helmet that's probably poorly fitted and offers inadequate protection. Your sword isn't the gleaming, perfectly balanced weapon from movies. It's a chunk of iron that's been poorly forged, might have rust spots, and probably isn't very sharp because you don't have the skills or tools to maintain a good edge. Your shield is wooden, covered in leather if you're fortunate, and it's already been damaged in previous fights. The straps are fraying, it's heavy and awkward. Going into battle, you're already compromised. You're malnourished, diseased, exhausted from months of campaign. Your body isn't operating at anywhere near full capacity. Modern soldiers are fed, rested, and medically supported before combat. You're half-starved, sleep-deprived, and probably suffering from at least one chronic illness. The moments before battle are terrifying, in ways movies never capture. You can see the enemy army arrayed against you. You hear the noise, thousands of men shouting, drums beating, weapons clanging. Your body is flooding with adrenaline, but you're also fighting the overwhelming urge to run. Medieval armies had rear guards partially to prevent their own soldiers from fleeing. Your bowels are liquid with fear. Some men around you are actually soiling themselves. Nobody judges. It's that kind of fear. Your hands shake so badly you can barely hold your spear. Your heart is pounding so hard you can hear it in your ears. Every instinct is screaming at you to run, but you can't because you're packed in with hundreds of other men and there's nowhere to go. When the armies finally collide, it's not a series of individual duels. It's a press of bodies, shields crashing together, weapons swinging wildly, men shoving and being shoved. You can barely see what's happening beyond the people immediately around you. The noise is overwhelming, screaming, metal on metal, the specific sounds bodies make when damaged. The smell is intense. Sweat, fear, blood, and waste. Because yes, people lose control of bodily functions in combat. Your actual fighting technique is crude. Knights might have refined skills, but you're basically trying to stab or hack at anyone you can reach while keeping your shield up and not getting killed. There's no room for fancy footwork. You're in a packed mass of bodies barely able to move. Your main job is to push forward, hold your ground, and strike when opportunities appear. You thrust your spear at a man's face. It glances off his helmet. He swings an axe at you. You barely get your shield up in time. The impact numbs your entire arm. You're being shoved from behind by your own troops, pushed forward into the melee, whether you want to go or not. Someone steps on your foot. An elbow catches you in the ribs. You can't breathe properly because of the press of bodies and the panic squeezing your chest. Exhaustion sets in frighteningly fast. Swinging a sword or spear while wearing armor, even light armor, is incredibly draining. Within minutes you're breathing hard. Your arms feel like lead. Your shield becomes impossibly heavy. The heat inside your helmet is suffocating. You're drenched in sweat, and visibility through your helmet's eye slits is poor and getting worse. The injuries you'd sustain or witness are genuinely horrific. Swords don't make clean cuts like in movies. They hack and tear. Maces crush bones and pulp flesh. Spears punch through armor and create deep puncture wounds. Arrows can pin limbs to shields or bodies to the ground. The human body becomes damaged in ways that would make a modern person vomit. You'd see people with their faces split open by sword strokes, arms hanging by strips of flesh after glancing blows, abdominal wounds that let intestines spill out, which is a death sentence but a slow one, crushed skulls from mace strikes with brain matter visible, eyes destroyed by arrows or spear tips. The reality of what weapons do to human bodies is the stuff of nightmares. There's a man next to you whose jaw has been torn off by a mace strike. He's still alive, still conscious, making these awful gargling sounds as he tries to scream through the wreckage of his face. His hands are clutching at the wound, trying to hold things together that can't be held together. Nobody can help him. Nobody even tries. The battle continues around him while he suffers. The sounds are worse than the sights. Screaming doesn't sound like movie screaming, it's higher, more desperate, animal. The specific sound of bones breaking under impact is distinctive and haunting. The wet sounds of weapons entering bodies, the gurgling as someone tries to breathe through a throat wound. These audio memories would follow you forever. If you're wounded in battle, the prognosis is grim. Even if you survive the fight, infection will likely finish you off. Battlefield first aid consists of maybe bandaging the wound with dirty cloth and hoping for the best. Deeper wounds get cauterized with hot metal, which is exactly as terrible as it sounds. There's no anesthetic. Pain management is non-existent. Death on the battlefield isn't instant or clean for most people. You'd watch wounded men suffer for hours or days. Some beg to be finished off. Others lie delirious from blood loss, calling for mothers or wives. The battlefield after the fighting stops is a landscape of suffering, with the dying scattered among the dead, and both being looted by whoever won the field. The psychological impact of battle is profound and completely untreated. You'd fight, watch friends die horribly, maybe kill people yourself, witness unimaginable carnage, and then nothing. No debriefing, no counselling, no recognition of trauma. You're expected to get up the next day and continue the campaign. Medieval people developed their own coping mechanisms: drinking heavily, religious rationalization, emotional numbing, but none of these address the underlying damage. After your first real battle, you can't sleep. Every time you close your eyes, you see the faces of the men you killed or tried to kill. You hear the sounds, you smell the blood. You try drinking wine to help you sleep, but it just makes the nightmares more vivid. Nobody talks about this. Everyone just pretends they're fine, so you pretend too, but you're not fine, and you'll never be fine again. Repeated battles do cumulative psychological damage. Each engagement chips away at your humanity. You become desensitized to violence, which helps you function but damages your capacity for normal human feeling. The person who eventually returns home, if you survive that long, is fundamentally different from the person who left, and not in good ways. The randomness of survival is maddening. Skilled fighters die from lucky strikes by inexperienced opponents. Complete novices survive through pure chance. There's no justice or logic to who makes it and who doesn't. This randomness makes it impossible to feel truly secure. No amount of skill or preparation can guarantee survival when so much depends on pure luck. Chapter 7. Disease and Medical Nightmares. Let's focus specifically on the medical horrors of the Crusades, because this is where the gap between medieval reality and modern expectations becomes most stark. You're used to antibiotics, sterile medical environments, and doctors who understand germ theory. In the crusading era, you have none of that, and the results are catastrophic. Start with the basic fact that medieval people don't understand what causes disease. The dominant theory is miasma, the idea that bad air from rotting matter causes illness. This is completely wrong, which means all medical interventions based on this theory are useless or counterproductive. Doctors don't wash their hands because they don't know about germs. Surgical instruments are reused without sterilization. Wounds are packed, with materials that introduce infection rather than preventing it. The miasma theory leads to practices that make things worse. They might bring aromatic herbs to ward off bad air while standing in conditions perfect for disease transmission. They'll move sick people to different locations to escape the bad air, spreading disease. They attribute illness to divine punishment or imbalanced humours, leading to treatments that weaken already sick patients. Camp diseases are your constant companions throughout the crusade. Dysentery, which we've mentioned, is just the beginning. You've also got typhoid, typhus and cholera spreading through contaminated water and food. These diseases cause fever, severe diarrhea, vomiting and dehydration. Without modern rehydration therapy and antibiotics, mortality rates are shocking, 30 to 50% or higher, depending on the specific illness and circumstances. The symptoms of these diseases are absolutely miserable. Imagine having dysentery for weeks or months. Your intestines are inflamed and cramping constantly. You're running to defecate dozens of times per day, passing what's mostly blood and mucus. You're feverish and delirious. You can't keep food or water down. You're wasting away visibly, your body consuming its own muscle tissue for energy. And there's no effective treatment. You just endure until you either recover or die. The fever dreams are particularly horrible. You're burning up, but you feel cold. You see things that aren't there. Demons, angels, dead friends coming to visit. You can't tell what's real and what's hallucination. Time becomes meaningless. You might think hours have passed when it's been minutes, or think minutes have passed when it's been days. You exist in this twilight state between life and death, and you're not sure which side you want to fall on. Typhus comes from body lice, which infest everyone's clothing and hair in medieval armies. There's no escaping them. The lice bite and defecate on your skin, transmitting bacteria that cause high fever, severe headaches, and a distinctive rash. The fever can cook your brain, causing delirium, confusion, and permanent cognitive damage if you survive. Typhus spreads like wildfire through crowded, filthy crusader camps. Malaria is endemic. In many regions, crusaders pass through and fought in. The fever comes in waves, chills so violent your teeth chatter, followed by burning fever that makes you feel like you're on fire. This cycles repeatedly, weakening you progressively. Without treatment, malaria can damage your liver, kidneys, and brain. It can kill you outright, or leave you chronically ill and vulnerable to other diseases. The cyclic nature of malaria fever is maddening. You'll feel relatively okay for a few hours, think maybe you're recovering, and then the next wave hits. The chills are so intense you can't stop shaking, even when you're wrapped in every layer you own. Then the fever spikes, and you're throwing off those layers, convinced you're burning alive. Your head pounds, your joints ache, and tomorrow, or the next day, it'll happen again. Battlefield injuries, even minor ones, frequently become infected. That sword cut on your arm, without antibiotics or proper wound care, bacteria have free rein. The wound becomes red, hot and swollen. Pus develops, which medieval doctors actually think is a good sign, part of healing. The infection spreads into deeper tissue, Red streaks run up your arm toward your heart, sepsis developing. Fever sets in, delirium follows, then death. Gangrene is a common complication of wounds. The tissue dies and rots while still attached to your body. It turns black and gives off a distinctive, horrifying smell. The only treatment is amputation, cutting off the dead tissue before infection spreads to vital organs. An amputation in medieval conditions is its own nightmare. The smell of gangrene is something you can never forget once you've encountered it. It's sweet and rotten at the same time, with undertones that trigger your gag reflex at a primal level. You can smell a gangrenous wound from across the camp. Everyone knows what that smell means. Everyone knows that person is either going to lose that limb or die, and probably both. Medieval surgery is torture without anesthesia. For an amputation, you're held down by several strong men, while a surgeon uses a saw to cut through your bone. You feel everything. The pain is beyond description. You're screaming and struggling while they work. They might give you alcohol or opium beforehand, but it doesn't remotely numb the pain. Shock kills some patients before the procedure is complete. Infection kills most of the rest within days or weeks. The medical tools are crude and non-sterile. Saws for amputations are similar to woodworking tools. Cautery irons for sealing wounds are just metal rods heated in fire. Scalpels are sharp but carry bacteria from previous patients. The surgeon's hands are unwashed. His apron is stiff with dried blood from earlier procedures. Everything about the setup is designed to introduce infection. Bloodletting is a standard treatment for almost everything, based on the theory that balancing the body's humours promotes health. Doctors will drain significant amounts of your blood when you're already weakened by disease or injury. This doesn't help. It makes you weaker, more susceptible to infection, and slower to heal. But it's considered proper medical practice, so if you're sick enough to see a doctor, you're getting bled. They use leeches or open veins with a lancet. You watch your blood you desperately need, drip into a bowl while the physician nods sagely about balancing your humours. You feel weaker afterward, not better. But when you mention this, they tell you it's part of the healing process, and you need more bloodletting. It's hard to say no when they're the authority and you're desperate for any hope of recovery. Herbal remedies range from useless to actively harmful. Some plants do have legitimate medicinal properties, but medieval doctors don't understand proper dosing or which conditions each remedy actually treats. You might get a preparation that helps with pain but damages your liver, or something that's supposed to reduce fever but actually has no medicinal value whatsoever. Dental problems are excruciating and untreatable. You're eating rough food that wears down your teeth. Sugar consumption among those who can afford it causes cavities. There's no dental care, no fillings, no root canals, certainly no pain relief. When a tooth abscesses, you suffer through incredible pain until either the infection breaks and drains, temporarily relieving pressure, or spreads to your jaw or brain and kills you. Tooth extraction is done without anesthesia using crude tools that often break the tooth rather than removing it cleanly. You have a molar that's been aching for weeks. The pain is constant and radiating through your entire jaw. It throbs in time with your heartbeat. You can't eat on that side. You can't sleep because the pain wakes you. Finally, you go to someone who claims they can pull teeth. They have you sit on the ground, brace your head against their stomach, and then they attack your tooth with metal pliers. It takes multiple attempts, each one sending lightning bolts of agony through your skull, before the tooth finally comes out, in pieces. Eye injuries and infections are common, and often lead to permanent blindness. An arrow wound to the eye, infection from the omnipresent flies, disease that causes corneal damage. There's no treatment for any of this. You just go blind, and in medieval military context, being blind makes you utterly dependent on others' charity to survive. Parasitic infections are universal. Everyone has intestinal worms, roundworms, tapeworms, hookworms. You can feel them moving in your gut. They steal nutrition from your already inadequate diet. They cause abdominal pain, diarrhea, and various complications. Some treatments exist, but they're not reliably effective, and you'll be reinfected constantly from contaminated food and water. Sometimes you see evidence of the worms in your stool. Long, pale segments or whole worms. It's disgusting and disturbing, knowing these things are inside you, living off you. You try the herbal deworming treatments available, which make you violently ill for days. Maybe you pass some worms, but you know they're not all gone, and they'll be back to full population soon enough. Scurvy develops after months without fresh fruits or vegetables. Your gums bleed and become swollen. Your teeth loosen and fall out. Old wounds reopen. You bruise easily. You feel weak and depressed. Your body is literally falling apart from vitamin C deficiency. Untreated, scurvy will kill you. The cure is simple. Eat citrus or fresh vegetables, but on campaign, these might be completely unavailable. Mental illness receives no recognition or treatment. The trauma, stress, and horror of the crusading experience break people psychologically. Some develop what we'd now call PTSD, intrusive memories, nightmares, panic attacks, emotional numbness. Others sink into depression. Some experience psychotic breaks. Medieval medicine has no framework for understanding or treating these conditions. You're just considered melancholic, possessed, or weak in faith. You see a man who was a good soldier have a complete breakdown. He stops responding to orders. He sits and rocks, muttering to himself. Sometimes he screams about things nobody else can see. The others avoid him, afraid whatever's wrong with him might be contagious or demonic. Nobody helps. Eventually he just disappears one night. Whether he wandered off or was quietly disposed of, nobody says. The cumulative effect of all these medical issues is that Crusader armies typically lost more people to disease than to combat. The march east, the sieges, the occupation, all of these killed through illness more than through enemy action. You could be the best warrior in the army and still die deliriously from typhoid in a camp latrine. Your martial skill means nothing against bacteria and parasites. Time equals 5 seconds greater than less than Chapter 8. The social realities nobody tells you. Beyond the physical horrors, the social dynamics of crusading would be deeply alienating for someone with modern values. The rigid hierarchies, the casual cruelty, the religious justifications for behavior that violates basic ethics. All of this creates a society that would be profoundly uncomfortable for you to navigate. Class divisions are absolute and unbridgeable. You're a common soldier, and nobles are a completely different category of human in medieval thinking. They have rights and privileges you don't. They eat better, sleep better, and are treated better. If you're wounded, they get medical attention first. If there's not enough food, they eat until satisfied while you starve. This isn't seen as unfair. It's the natural order. A noble can strike or even end a commoner with minimal consequences. If a knight decides you've been insolent and beats you, there's no recourse. If you strike back, you'll be punished severely or executed. The legal system is tilted completely in favour of those with status and wealth. Your life has less value in every measurable way. You watch a knight beat a common soldier for some minor offence. Maybe the soldier didn't move out of the way fast enough. The beating is brutal. The soldier's nose breaks. He's spitting blood. He can't even protect himself because raising a hand against a noble would mean death. Afterward, he just has to accept it. No justice, no compensation, just the understanding that this is how the world works. The language barriers within the Crusader armies create constant friction. You've got French speakers, German speakers, Italian speakers, and others, all trying to coordinate military operations while barely understanding each other. Misunderstandings escalate into violence. Different language groups form competing factions. The unity supposedly provided by shared Christian faith is undermined by these divisions. Women on, Crusade, and there were some, despite popular imagination, faced extraordinary hardships beyond what men dealt with. They were vulnerable to assault from both their own forces and the enemy. They had to manage menstruation without modern hygiene products while on campaign. Pregnancy and childbirth in Crusader camps or on the march were deadly dangerous. The social structures that might have offered some protection at home were absent or weakened in crusading context. Slavery is a fact of life that nobody questions. Captured enemies are enslaved. The Crusader states have active slave markets. This is normal and accepted. If you're bothered by the casual buying and selling of human beings, you'd need to keep those feelings hidden because everyone else sees this as natural and proper. The racism and religious bigotry would be overwhelming. Muslims and Jews are not just enemies, they're considered fundamentally inferior, servants of Satan, legitimate targets for any abuse. The slurs, the casual dehumanization, the complete absence of empathy for suffering if it's inflicted on non-Christians. This is normalized behavior. Questioning it would mark you as suspicious, possibly heretical. You hear the things people say casually, without shame or hesitation. Dehumanizing language that reduces entire populations to animals or demons. Jokes about violence that would make a modern person recoil. Plans discussed openly that involve actions you know are fundamentally wrong. And if you object, if you show discomfort, you become suspect. So you stay quiet and feel a piece of yourself die with every silence. Even other Christians aren't safe from this thinking. Eastern Orthodox Christians, Byzantine Greeks, local Syrian Christians, they're all considered questionable and inferior to Latin Christians. The theological differences matter enormously to medieval people in ways that would seem absurd to modern observers. Crusaders sacked Constantinople, a Christian city, during the Fourth Crusade. The rationalization was that Orthodox Christians were schismatics and heretics who deserved punishment. Concepts of honor and masculinity are rigid and toxic. Malaria is endemic. In many regions, Crusaders passed through and fought in. The fever comes in waves, chills so violent your teeth chatter, followed by burning fever that makes you feel like you're on fire. This cycles repeatedly, weakening you progressively. Without treatment, malaria can damage your liver, kidneys, and brain. It can kill you outright, or leave you chronically ill and vulnerable to other diseases. The cyclic nature of malaria fever is maddening. You'll feel relatively okay for a few hours, think maybe you're recovering, and then the next wave hits. The chills are so intense you can't stop shaking, even when you're wrapped in every layer you own. Then the fever spikes, and you're throwing off those layers, convinced you're burning alive. Your head pounds, your joints ache, and tomorrow, or the next day, it'll happen again. Battlefield injuries, even minor ones, frequently become infected. That sword cut on your arm, without antibiotics or proper wound care, bacteria have free rein. The wound becomes red, hot, and swollen. Pus develops, which medieval doctors actually think is a good sign, part of healing. The infection spreads into deeper tissue. Red streaks run up your arm toward your heart, sepsis developing. Fever sets in, delirium follows, then death. Gangrene is a common complication of wounds. The tissue dies and rots while still attached to your body. It turns black and gives off a distinctive, horrifying smell. The only treatment is amputation, cutting off the dead tissue before infection spreads to vital organs. An amputation in medieval conditions is its own nightmare. The smell of gangrene is something you can never forget once you've encountered it. It's sweet and rotten at the same time, with undertones that trigger your gag reflex at a primal level. You can smell a gangrenous wound from across the camp. Everyone knows what that smell means. Violence against the vulnerable is common and mostly unremarked. When cities fall, The powerless are victimized. This is considered normal wartime behavior. Some moral authorities condemn it, but enforcement is minimal. The powerless suffer, and the powerful face few consequences. If you have any modern sense of consent and bodily autonomy, watching this happen, or being pressured to participate, would destroy you. Propaganda and lies shape everything. Leaders manipulate their troops with promises they won't keep, atrocity stories that are exaggerated or fabricated, and visions of glory that bear no relation to reality. You're being used as a tool for others' political and economic ambitions, but this is dressed up as holy service to God. Seeing through the manipulation doesn't help because you're trapped in the machine anyway. The concept of justified warfare is completely different from modern just war theory. There's no concept of proportionality, of protecting civilians, of limiting destruction. The goal is victory through whatever means necessary. Cities that resist can be destroyed. Populations can be expelled or eliminated. These aren't war crimes in medieval thinking. They're legitimate tactics against God's enemies. Mental health is not recognized as a thing that can be damaged or that requires care. You're expected to witness horrors, commit violence, endure trauma, and emerge unchanged. When people break psychologically, and many do, they're considered weak, cursed, or possessed. There's no framework for understanding that the human mind has limits, and that crossing those limits causes injury as real as physical wounds. Chapter 9. Why Modern You Specifically Wouldn't Survive. Let's bring this back to you, the modern person reading this. Not medieval you, but actual you, with your 21st century body, psychology and expectations. You wouldn't last a day in the age of the Crusades, and here's specifically why. Your body is fundamentally unprepared. You're used to climate control, soft beds, and unlimited clean water. Your feet have never walked more than a few miles in a day, let alone 20 or 30 miles in poorly constructed shoes over rough roads. Your hands have never done sustained manual labour, digging trenches, building siege equipment, swinging weapons for hours. Within days, you'd be a mass of blisters, pulled muscles, and exhaustion. Modern feet are soft and weak. You've spent your life in cushioned shoes on flat surfaces. The calluses you'd need to walk all day on rough roads would take months to develop, months you don't have. Your arches would collapse, your ankles would twist, your toenails would become ingrown and infected. Every step would be agony, and you'd have thousands of steps to take every single day. Your immune system has no experience with medieval diseases. You've been protected your entire life by vaccines, antibiotics and sanitation. Exposure to typhoid, dysentery, typhus or cholera would overwhelm your body's defences. The bacterial loads in medieval food, water and living conditions would devastate you. You'd be violently ill from things medieval people's bodies could tolerate. Your pain tolerance is non-existent by medieval standards. You take ibuprofen for headaches. You get anesthesia for dental work. The idea of enduring serious pain without any relief is completely foreign to you. The first time you experience genuine medieval hardship, infected wound, broken bone, severe illness, you'd be completely unable to cope with the pain level. You've probably never experienced real pain that lasted more than a few hours before modern medicine intervened. You've never had to just live with something broken or infected for days, weeks, months. You've never had to work through pain that makes you want to scream. You've never had to smile and pretend everything's fine, while your body is screaming that something is desperately wrong. Your psychological resilience is untested. You've never experienced real violence, genuine starvation, or the death of people close to you in traumatic circumstances. Medieval people were conditioned from childhood to accept hardship, death, and suffering as normal parts of life. Your first exposure to battlefield carnage would probably cause complete psychological breakdown. Your moral framework is incompatible with crusading reality. You believe in human rights, equality, consent, and proportionality in conflict. You'd be asked to participate in or witness actions that violate all these principles. You'd either refuse and be punished or executed, or comply and suffer devastating moral injury that would destroy your sense of self. The first time you're ordered to do something that contradicts your fundamental values, you'd be faced with an impossible choice. Refuse and face punishment, possibly death. Comply and live. With having done something you consider deeply wrong, there's no good option. Medieval people had different values that made these choices easier. You don't. You'd be paralyzed or destroyed by choices that crusaders made routinely. Your expectations of authority and justice would be constantly violated. You expect that leaders have some accountability, that there are rules and systems to appeal to when you're wronged. Medieval crusading has none of that. Authority is arbitrary and absolute. You'd be powerless in ways modern people can't truly comprehend, and you lack the cultural conditioning to accept powerlessness gracefully. Your diet has made you dependent on foods that don't exist in this context. You need more calories than medieval people because your body isn't efficient. You've never experienced real scarcity. You can't eat rancid meat, mouldy bread, and mystery stew without getting sick. You don't know how to identify edible plants or prepare food without modern tools. You'd starve while surrounded by things medieval people could extract nutrition from. Your sleep requirements are higher. Modern people need 7 to 9 hours of sleep in comfortable conditions. You're getting maybe 4 to 6 hours on the ground in all weather with constant noise, discomfort, and threat. Chronic sleep deprivation would impair your judgment, slow your reactions, and make you vulnerable to accidents and attacks. After weeks of poor sleep, you'd start experiencing hallucinations and cognitive impairment. You'd make stupid mistakes that get you or others hurt. You'd fall asleep while supposed to be on watch. You'd be unable to think clearly enough to navigate the complex social dynamics that might keep you alive. Sleep deprivation would quite literally make you too stupid to survive. Your social skills are wrong for this context. You expect egalitarian interactions. You don't instinctively defer to nobility. You question authority. You want explanations for orders. All of this would mark you as insubordinate and dangerous. You'd either be beaten into submission or executed as a troublemaker. Your hygiene expectations would be impossible to maintain, and the absence of cleanliness would affect you more severely than medieval people. You're not conditioned to live in filth. The constant presence of lice, fleas, and your own unwashed body would be psychologically devastating. You'd develop skin infections modern people never experience. Your complete lack of combat training and experience would be immediately fatal in any actual fighting. Video games and movies haven't prepared you to kill or avoid being killed. The first time you faced real combat, with actual weapons swinging at your actual body, you'd freeze or panic. Medieval soldiers who'd been in fights since childhood would cut you down easily. The first time someone actually tries to kill you, really kill you, not in a movie or game, but in physical reality with a weapon that will end your existence, the terror would override everything else. You wouldn't remember your training because you don't have any real training. You wouldn't think tactically. You'd just be an animal trying not to die, and animals without fangs or claws don't last long in fights. Your religious doubts would be dangerous in a context where faith is mandatory. You can't fake genuine religious fervor convincingly. Your questions and skepticism would mark you as potentially heretical. In an army motivated by religious certainty, your doubts would isolate and endanger you. Your lack of practical skills would make you useless. You can't repair equipment, treat injuries, navigate without GPS, identify safe water, build shelter, or perform any of the practical tasks that keep medieval people alive. You'd be dependent on others' charity, which runs out quickly when resources are scarce. The cumulative effect of all these deficiencies means you die. Not metaphorically, not exaggerating, actually die. probably within the first month from disease, injury, combat, or simple exposure. The few modern people who might survive longer are those with military experience, outdoor survival skills, high pain tolerance, and psychological resilience. But even they would struggle enormously. The romantic notion of time travelling to historical periods and thriving there is pure fantasy. The past was a brutal, unforgiving place that would destroy modern people. The Crusades specifically combined every terrible aspect of medieval life: disease, violence, hardship, moral chaos, into a concentrated nightmare that lasted years. Conclusion. Respecting the unromantic truth, we've journeyed through the reality of the Crusades, the disease, the violence, the starvation, the economic ruin, the moral devastation. The picture that emerges is nothing like the romantic crusader narratives of noble quests and heroic adventures. It's a story of suffering, exploitation, and horror on a massive scale. The people who participated in the Crusades, on all sides, endured conditions modern people can barely imagine. They were tough in ways we're not, conditioned to accept hardships we'd find intolerable. But being tough doesn't mean they enjoyed it, or that it was glorious. Most crusaders died far from home, in miserable conditions, having achieved nothing of lasting value. The lucky ones made it back broken in body and spirit. The statistics are sobering. Of the thousands who took up the cross for the First Crusade, only a fraction reached Jerusalem. Many died on the march, more died during sieges and battles. Disease claimed more lives than combat ever did, and of those who survived to see Jerusalem, many died shortly after from disease, continued fighting, or the hardships of life in the Crusader states. The Crusader states themselves were temporary, conquered and reconquered, never achieving the stable Christian presence in the Holy Land that the enterprise supposedly sought. The Fourth Crusade famously never even reached Muslim territory, instead sacking Constantinople and establishing a short-lived Latin empire that accomplished nothing of value. Later Crusades became increasingly cynical enterprises, motivated more by politics and economics than religious devotion. The legacy of the Crusades is complicated and often toxic. They poisoned relations between Christian and Muslim worlds for generations. They demonstrated how religious fervour could be weaponized for conquest and exploitation. They showed how ordinary people could be manipulated into catastrophic undertakings through promises of spiritual reward and material gain that rarely materialized. Understanding the reality of the Crusades doesn't diminish the resilience of the people who lived through them. If anything, it makes their endurance more remarkable. They survived conditions that would break modern people, and they did it without most of the physical and psychological support systems we take for granted. Their toughness was real, even if the enterprise they devoted it to was fundamentally flawed. But let's be clear, you, modern reader, would not survive. Your body isn't prepared, your mind isn't conditioned, your skills aren't relevant. The age of the Crusades would chew you up and spit you out, leaving you as another unnamed casualty in one of history's most brutal periods. The medical realities alone would probably kill you. The diseases you'd have no immunity to, the injuries you'd have no way to properly treat, the malnutrition and dehydration, the infections from minor wounds. Modern medicine has made us soft in ways we don't fully appreciate until we imagine life without it. The psychological realities would break you even if your body somehow held together. The constant violence and death, the moral compromises, the powerlessness, the crushing monotony of suffering. Without modern frameworks for understanding and treating trauma, without the psychological tools we use to process difficult experiences, you'd simply shatter. Hollywood sells you fantasy crusaders, noble, clean, heroic. History offers you the truth, desperate, diseased, morally compromised people trapped in an enterprise that destroyed most of them. The gap between fantasy and reality is vast, and falling into that gap would be fatal. The knights in shining armour were covered in filth and probably had dysentery. The holy mission was cover for political ambitions and land grabs. The glory was mostly dying in pain far from home. The heroism was just trying to survive one more day in conditions that shouldn't be survivable. This is the reality that gets airbrushed out of the popular imagination. So the next time you see a movie romanticizing the Crusades, remember what we've discussed. Remember the dysentery, the starvation, the heat, the disease, the casual cruelty, the moral chaos. Remember that these were real people enduring real horror, not actors performing choreographed scenes with craft services. Between takes, the age of the Crusades was a testament to human endurance, yes, but also to human folly, cruelty, and the terrible things people will do when convinced they're serving a higher purpose. You wouldn't last a day there, and honestly, that's probably for the best. The lessons we can draw from this are valuable. Question romantic narratives about the past. Understand that people who lived through historical horrors were tough, but that doesn't make those horrors good or desirable. Appreciate the genuinely good things about modernity, medicine, sanitation, human rights concepts, international law. These aren't guarantees of safety or justice, but they're better than the alternative. And maybe, just maybe, be skeptical when leaders invoke grand causes and divine missions to recruit people for enterprises that will primarily benefit those leaders while destroying those who actually do the work. That pattern didn't end with the Crusades. Understanding how it worked then might help us recognize it now. Thanks for joining me on this journey through one of history's most brutal periods. If you enjoyed learning about why the Crusades would absolutely destroy you, make sure to subscribe for more content, where we demolish romanticized historical myths. Hit that like button, leave a comment with your thoughts, and I'll see you in the next video, where we continue exploring the harsh realities of history that Hollywood doesn't want you to know about. Until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, and be grateful you live in an era with antibiotics, running water, and the freedom to not go on catastrophic religious military expeditions. Trust me, it's better this way.